Have you ever watched someone's entire world collapse in just a few seconds, right in front of you? I mean, literally witnessed that fragile moment when a person's confidence crumbles, their eyes shift from hope to humiliation, and they silently pray no one else notices the storm inside them? If you've ever stood in line at a grocery store, restaurant, or gas station and seen someone's card get declined, you already know that instant of dread. It's uncomfortable, awkward. But sometimes it leads to something unbelievable. What if I told you that a simple trip to the supermarket turned into a life-changing moment for two complete strangers? Stick with me, because by the end of the story, you're going to understand why that man's unthinkable action changed more than just one life, and you're going to get the answer you came here for. This isn't just another kindness of strangers story. There's a twist, a secret, and a reason why this story is exploding across TikTok and YouTube Shorts right now. So let's dive in. Let's set the scene. It's a cold Thursday morning in early December. The kind of day where the wind cuts right through your jacket, where your fingers sting just from touching the steering wheel. Holiday music hums softly from store speakers, and fluorescent lights buzz overhead in the small-town grocery store just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Picture it clearly. Frost still clings to the window panes. The parking lot is full of bundled-up moms, tired delivery drivers, and elderly shoppers trying to stock up before the next snow hits. Inside, the line at checkout stretches long, but people are patient. Tired, but patient. The air smells like cinnamon candles and hot rotisserie chicken. It's almost comforting. Now focus on her. She's in her mid-20s, maybe younger. Wearing a hoodie that's too thin for the weather and sneakers that have clearly seen better days. There's something about her posture, slightly hunched, eyes flicking toward the exit, fingers clutching her wallet a little too tight. You can tell she's trying to blend in, trying not to seem nervous. In her cart, just the basics. Eggs, a gallon of milk, a small pack of diapers, some instant noodles. The kind of groceries you buy when you're trying to make $40 stretch for an entire week. Nothing fancy. Nothing unnecessary. She gets to the front. The cashier is friendly, scanning the items with a practiced rhythm. The girl swipes her card. Pause. Declined. She tries again, this time with a forced little laugh, like, maybe it's just a glitch. Declined again. You can almost feel her stomach sink. Her cheeks flush red. She mumbles something, starts checking her phone frantically, fingers trembling just enough for you to notice. The line behind her grows quiet. That kind of awkward quiet where everyone is pretending not to stare, but they are. Eyes darting, whispering. One guy sighs loudly, another shifts impatiently. You've seen this happen. We all have. But what happens next? That's what no one saw coming. Before we reveal the man behind her, and what he did that left the entire store stunned, I want you to stay with me. Because this story isn't just about a declined credit card. It's about who we become in someone's worst moment. It's about how split-second decisions can ripple through lives. It's about trauma, redemption, and the kind of empathy that goes viral not because it's flashy, but because it's real. This isn't staged. There were no cameras rolling. No viral hashtags at the time. No influencer angles. Just raw human experience that ended up touching millions once the truth came out. Now, I want you to ask yourself something, and be honest. If you had been standing in that checkout line, watching that girl panic as she realized she couldn't pay for her groceries, what would you have done? Would you have looked away? Would you have offered to help? Or would you have done what this man did? Something so unexpected, so out of the box, that it not only stunned the people in line but left the cashier speechless? And here's the kicker. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't even leave a name. As you're watching this, maybe you've been that girl. Maybe you've stood in line with a knot in your stomach, praying the transaction goes through because it's the last few dollars in your account. Or maybe you've been the person behind her, watching, unsure of what to do, hoping someone else steps in first. That's why this story connects so deeply with people. Because it's not just her story. It could be yours. And it forces us to ask, what kind of person am I when no one's watching? Now, let's talk about him. The man behind her. Mid-30s, dressed in a worn black jacket, work boots caked in dry mud. The kind of guy you don't look twice at in line. Not flashy. Not loud. Just there. But from the moment her card got declined, his eyes never left her. He didn't frown. Didn't sigh. Didn't roll his eyes like others did. He just stood there quietly, watching, until he did something that would flip this ordinary moment into the kind of story that ends up all over trending pages, reaction videos, and news feeds. But before I tell you what he did, I want you to remember something important. We judge people way too fast. Too often, we look at someone and assume we know their story. But what if this man, the one who stepped up in the most unexpected way, was carrying a secret of his own? What if the reason he helped her wasn't just kindness, but redemption? Guilt? A connection that would only be revealed later when the truth came out? And that's the heart of this story. It's not about money. It's not about groceries. It's about how one small act of compassion can crack open years of pain, loss, and unexpected healing. Because when he handed something to the cashier, everyone thought he was just paying for her food. But that wasn't all he did. Not even close. Now listen closely, because this is where it starts to unravel. This is where you realize the story you thought you were hearing isn't the real story at all. The cashier paused, blinked twice, then looked back at him, stunned. People in line started murmuring. The girl turned around, confused. And what he said next, it made her knees buckle. She had to grab the cart to stay upright. No one, not the cashier, not the people in line, not even the girl, expected that. But here's the thing. I'm not just telling you a feel-good story for clicks. I want you to feel this. I want you to walk with these characters, live in their shoes, see through their eyes. Because the rest of the story is going to challenge you. It's going to pull at your heart. And by the end, you're not just going to know what he did, you're going to understand why. Why this man changed her life. Why this moment broke the internet. And why you'll never forget what happens next. So, don't click away. Don't scroll past. You came here for answers, and I promise they're coming. But you have to stay with me. Because what happened next didn't just restore her faith in humanity. It unearthed a connection neither of them saw coming. A link buried in pain, time, and something neither of them had spoken about in years. It was fate, or something like it. And just when you think you've figured it out, that's when the real twist hits. But let me leave you with this. Before we dive deeper into what that man said, who he really was, and what it meant for both their futures, ask yourself this. What if a single moment could rewrite your entire life story? Because for her, that moment started with a beep, a declined card, and a stranger who did the unthinkable. Now, are you ready to hear what happened next? Because what he said next will change everything. The air in the grocery store seemed to freeze for a moment after the man behind her leaned forward and quietly spoke to the cashier. Nobody heard exactly what he said, just that his voice was calm, measured, and carried a weight that made the cashier's eyes widen in confusion. Then came the hand gesture. A small envelope slid across the checkout counter that the cashier didn't know what to do with. The young woman turned toward him slowly, still gripping her cart, her heart pounding in her ears. Her body was frozen in a mixture of panic and disbelief, unsure if this was help or humiliation. She didn't know the man, had never seen him before. But in that moment, she felt something deeper than gratitude. She felt confusion, unease, and something else she couldn't name. Because this didn't feel like a random act of kindness. It felt like something more. Something deliberate. Almost personal. She didn't ask questions. Not then. She just stood there as the man gave her a small nod, subtle, restrained, and then picked up his own basket, walked past her, and exited the store without another word. No thank you was exchanged, no names shared. The cashier, stunned, completed her transaction and handed her not just her receipt, but the envelope the man had left behind. It wasn't heavy, just a simple white envelope with no writing on it. She didn't open it right away. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking too much. And as she stepped outside into the bitter cold, clutching her groceries and the strange envelope, she realized she wasn't just holding food and a mystery. She was holding something that felt like the beginning of a story that was already written long before she ever entered that store. Her name was Emily, and life hadn't been kind to her lately. Once a nursing student with big dreams and a bright future, She had dropped out a year ago when her mother got sick. She'd taken on 2 jobs to help pay medical bills, but it hadn't been enough. Her mother passed away 4 months ago, and since then, Emily had been barely surviving. The apartment she lived in was month to month, her heat was inconsistent, and the only reason she had diapers in her cart was because she'd skipped dinner for 3 nights. She had no family left, no real friends nearby, and the only person depending on her now was her 2-year-old son, Jace. Everything she did was for him. Every corner she cut, every late night at the diner, every quiet cry into her pillow, it was all for that little boy who had no idea how close they were to falling off the edge. That's why the card being declined wasn't just embarrassing, it was terrifying. It meant there was truly nothing left. No money, no backup, no way out, until that man stepped in. But even as she drove home, the mystery of him sat like a weight in her chest. Why had he helped her? And what was in the envelope? She finally opened it when she got back to her apartment, and Jace was asleep in his crib. Inside wasn't cash. It wasn't a gift card either. It was a letter. Just one sentence, handwritten in tight, sharp letters. You look just like her. That's it. No name. No context. Just that haunting sentence that made her blood run cold. Who was her? And how did this man know who she looked like? Was it a case of mistaken identity, or something else entirely? That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her head. The calmness in his voice, the certainty in his eyes. The way he had looked at her, not with pity, but with recognition. She tried to brush it off. Maybe he thought she reminded him of someone he once knew, a sister, a friend, a lost love. But something about the way it all played out didn't feel coincidental. It felt orchestrated, calculated. She'd lived enough hard days to know when something didn't sit right. And this was way too strange to ignore. But across town, that same man sat in the cab of his old pickup truck, engine off, watching the lights of the apartment building flicker against the snow. He hadn't followed her. He already knew where she lived. Knew more than he probably should. His name was Marcus, and he wasn't some good Samaritan with a bleeding heart. He was a man with a past. A long, complicated one. He didn't usually do things like this, get involved. But when he saw her in the checkout line, he felt like he was staring at a ghost. A ghost from 15 years ago that he had never been able to outrun. And now, somehow, it was standing in front of him in the form of a young woman who had no idea who he was or what they might share. Marcus had once been someone. A name that mattered in a certain circle, investment firms, corporate deals, 5-star hotels. But all of that ended the day his sister vanished without a trace. She had been 19, full of life and stubborn as hell. The cops had no leads. Just one clue, a blurry security cam photo from a gas station 2 states over. And then nothing. Marcus never stopped searching. Not for a single day. He ruined his career, blew through his money, chased shadows in dark alleys. Most people thought he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. But then last week, he found a photo on a message board. It was a woman holding a toddler, sitting at a bus stop, wrapped in a jacket too thin for the snow. And the face? It stopped his heart. It wasn't his sister. But it was close enough to make him think maybe there was more to the story. Maybe his sister had a daughter. Maybe she had left something behind. He didn't know for sure. But when he saw Emily in that checkout line, he felt it in his gut. This wasn't chance. This was connected. She had the same eyes. The same way of biting her lip when nervous. It was all too familiar. And that's why he did what he did. Not just to help her, but to open a door. A door into a story that had been buried for over a decade. A door that Emily didn't even know existed. Not yet. What neither of them knew, though, was that they weren't the only ones circling the truth. A third thread was unraveling behind the scenes. A woman named Carla, an ex-private investigator now working part-time at a veteran shelter, had been quietly gathering pieces of a mystery that had haunted her since her early days on the force. She had worked the case of Marcus's missing sister. Back when she still believed in the system. Back when she thought every disappearance had an answer. But this one never sat right. Too many dead ends. Too many things that didn't add up. And now, 15 years later, a familiar face had popped up in a surveillance reel sent to her by an anonymous tip. The face wasn't of the missing sister, but of Emily. And what made her stomach twist was where that footage had come from. It was a warehouse outside of Chicago, recently raided for trafficking activity. Carla had no idea why a girl who looked like the long-missing teen was showing up in a place like that. But her instincts told her something dark was about to surface. Something that tied Emily, Marcus, and a past everyone thought had been forgotten. So while Emily tried to live day to day, and Marcus tried to piece together the truth, Carla began digging. Pulling at threads that connected across state lines, across years, across lies that had gone unquestioned for far too long. As the days passed, Emily began noticing strange things. A van that lingered near her building. A note on her windshield with no handwriting. Her phone ringing once, then going dead when she picked up. At first, she thought it was just anxiety, stress. But when Jace's daycare called to say someone had shown up asking about his guardian, she knew something was wrong. And suddenly, the mystery man in the grocery store didn't feel like a stranger anymore. He felt like the only person who might have answers. But could she trust him? Could she trust anyone? The envelope. The letter. The strange connection. The danger slowly circling her world. It all pointed to a story much bigger than she could imagine. One that wasn't just about her or Jace. One that went back 15 years. To a girl who vanished. To secrets buried in the snow. And to the man who had just stepped back into her life, not to save her, but to uncover the truth he'd been chasing for far too long. And just as she was about to pick up the phone to call the number he left scribbled on the back of the receipt, there was a knock at her door. Not a loud one. Just soft, deliberate. Like someone who already knew she was home. She stood frozen. One hand on her child's crib. The other clutching the letter. Heart racing. Because deep down, she knew the story was no longer waiting to begin. It had already started. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the door. The knock had been too precise, too soft, like someone knew exactly what they were doing. She didn't move at first. Her instincts screamed for silence. The apartment was dark except for the dim nursery lamp beside Jace's crib. She clutched the envelope tighter, as if it could somehow protect her, the edges now creased from how tightly she had been holding it. Seconds passed. Another knock. Still quiet, still patient, like whoever was outside wasn't going anywhere. Slowly, she tiptoed across the room, peeking through the peephole, but what she saw made her heart skip. No one. The hallway was empty. She hesitated, then flicked on the outside light. Nothing. No footsteps, no sound of retreating boots down the stairwell. Just the eerie stillness of an old building long past bedtime. She waited, counting the seconds in her head, trying to decide whether it was paranoia or real danger. Then she noticed the shadow at the bottom of the door. A piece of paper had been slipped underneath. Emily knelt down, her hands trembling as she picked it up. No envelope this time. Just a torn-out notebook page with a single sentence written in rushed, all-caps handwriting. Trust no one. Not even him. She stared at it for what felt like forever. Her mind raced. Not even him? Did they mean Marcus? How would anyone else even know about him, unless this went far deeper than she thought? She grabbed her phone and called the number Marcus had left, but it rang once and went straight to voicemail. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her world was spiraling fast, and she couldn't tell what was real and what was a trap. But the warning felt too specific to ignore. Suddenly, she wasn't just the broke girl whose card got declined. She was something else, someone caught in the middle of something much bigger. The algorithm might call it mystery, missing persons, or true crime, but to her it was life or death, and the lines were blurring fast. Across town, Marcus was pacing inside a dusty motel room, staring at an old photograph he'd taken from a storage box that morning. The photo showed his sister, barefoot on the beach, laughing, her eyes identical to Emily's. The resemblance haunted him, gnawed at his gut. He wanted to believe it was just chance, a random resemblance. But when he looked into Emily's eyes, it felt like staring at something he lost and never expected to see again. Still, the past had taught him not to trust feelings. Feelings led to mistakes, and mistakes had consequences. He was about to call her again when a message pinged onto his screen. It was from a burner number. She knows now. You moved too fast. Step back before it's too late. Marcus's blood went cold. Someone was watching them. Someone who knew everything, and they weren't just trying to spook Emily. They were controlling the game. That's when it hit him. He hadn't been the only one following leads. Someone else had been following him. And now, that someone had stepped out of the shadows. He looked back at the photo and remembered what Carla once told him years ago. The ones who disappear usually have secrets, but the ones who find them often don't survive the truth. Meanwhile, Carla was in her makeshift office at the veterans shelter, piecing together printouts, maps, and surveillance stills. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. The photo from the warehouse haunted her, not just because Emily was in it, but because of who was standing behind her. A man partially obscured by shadows, wearing a coat that looked far too clean for that part of town. She ran the image through her old database and matched it to a known associate from a disbanded black market adoption ring that had operated covertly across 3 states in the early 2000s. The twist? The case had supposedly been closed years ago after the organization's leader died in a supposed car accident. But the deeper Carla dug, the more it looked like that case had been buried intentionally by people with resources, people who made sure questions never got asked again. The man in the coat was supposed to be dead. She now believed that Emily wasn't just a girl down on her luck. She might be the missing piece of a long-forgotten operation that had involved not only disappearances, but illegal identity changes and falsified birth records. Jace, the child Emily had protected with her life, might not just be her son. He might be the reason they were both being hunted. And if Carla's theory was right, Emily didn't know half of what she was caught in. The people she was up against didn't threaten. They erased. Back at her apartment, Emily finally got Jace back to sleep and sat in the silence of her tiny kitchen, staring at the 2 messages, one in her hand and one in her phone's call log. The walls felt like they were closing in, and she kept replaying every moment at the grocery store. How Marcus had looked at her, how deliberate his timing was. Was he really there by accident? Was it all just too perfect? But the part that twisted her stomach the most wasn't the fear. It was the flicker of hope she'd felt when he stepped in. That for once someone cared. That someone saw her. And that made the betrayal feel even more dangerous. She turned on her laptop and started searching, using every keyword she could think of. Missing Girl 2009, Black Market Adoption Chicago, Warehouse Trafficking 2023. She fell down rabbit holes filled with cold case forums, true crime podcasts, and viral stories that had trended for a week before disappearing from the public eye. That's when she found it, a photo on a Reddit thread. A girl in a hospital gown, blurry, sitting next to a nurse. The resemblance was chilling. Not to Emily, but to her son. The nose. The eyes. She wasn't crazy. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had documented her child. And they had done it years before he was ever supposed to exist. That's when the power cut out. The lights went dark. The screen went black. Emily froze. She heard nothing but the hum of silence and her own heartbeat. She grabbed Jace and stepped into the hallway. Just as she opened the door to the stairwell, a flash of movement caught her eye. Someone ducking into the hallway downstairs. She stepped back, heart pounding, and bolted the door. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching anymore. They were coming. And the biggest twist of all? As she looked at the corner of her laptop screen, where the browser tab was still faintly glowing in the dark, she realized it wasn't her search that led her to the photo. It had been emailed to her. From an address she hadn't seen in over a year. Her mother's. Emily's fingers hovered over the email, the name, Mom, sitting like a ghost on the screen in the darkness. It didn't make sense. Her mother had died a year ago in what was ruled a sudden cardiac arrest. She had mourned that loss in silence, alone, without a funeral, without answers. They hadn't been close in the final years, but her mother had still been the only family Emily had left, or so she thought. Now here was her name, linked to a message sent just 30 minutes ago. The attachment, Jace's photo in the hospital was time-stamped nearly 5 years before his birth. Her hands trembled as she clicked to expand the message. It read, "You need to run. He isn't who you think he is. But he doesn't know either. Don't blame him. Blame me." That was it. No name, no goodbye, just a chilling warning and a cryptic half-truth. Emily felt the world crack open beneath her feet. Nothing in her life was real. Not the name she'd been given. Not the childhood she barely remembered. Not even the birth certificate she used to register Jace for preschool. The woman she thought was her mother had been hiding her for a reason. The question was, from who? At that same moment, Marcus sat in his car across the street from Emily's building, watching the lights flicker back on. He knew someone had cut the power. It was a tactic he'd used himself in the past, but this wasn't his move. His mind raced as he pieced together the last few hours. The burner text, the photograph, the shadowy figure in the warehouse from Carla's research. It all pointed to something that had never really ended. Years ago, he thought he had shut it all down when he exposed the adoption ring, handed over everything he had to the feds, and disappeared into civilian life. But someone had survived. And now they were tying up loose ends, starting with the people Marcus had unknowingly led them to. That included Emily. The girl he thought was a stranger might actually be the very child who vanished from a hospital the night his sister died under suspicious circumstances. And Jace might be his nephew. Carla's voice came through his Bluetooth earpiece like a punch to the gut. "She's not safe. They're coming for her tonight. They found the photo you took. You need to get her out now, Marcus. I just intercepted chatter on the old surveillance channel. They think she has the key. The proof." Marcus slammed his fist against the steering wheel. "What key?" Carla hesitated. "Emily doesn't know it, but her birth name isn't Emily. It's Eden. Eden Monroe. Her mother, your sister, was going to testify against the agency before she vanished. Emily was only 4. They changed her name, buried the records, and planted her with a handler. Your sister had made a data backup before she died. It was encrypted, but it's not on a drive. It's encoded in Jace's DNA." The revelation was staggering. Emily's entire life had been a carefully constructed lie to protect a piece of evidence that could bring down a multi-state operation. And Jace, the little boy who loved toy trains and strawberry yogurt, was a human time capsule. The agency hadn't just come back to finish what they started. They came back to erase the last living proof of what they'd done. Marcus didn't wait. He threw open the car door and ran. He didn't care about the cameras, the potential ambush, or the rules he was breaking. All that mattered now was getting Emily and Jace out alive. Inside, Emily had packed what little she could, clutching Jace to her chest. The building creaked around her, the quiet unnatural. Then, a loud crash shattered the silence. Her front door had been kicked in. A man in black tactical gear stormed in, faceless behind a visor. Emily screamed, shielding Jace, but before the man could reach her, another figure tackled him from behind, Marcus. The two struggled, smashing furniture and knocking over lamps, until Marcus overpowered the man, yanking off his helmet. The face underneath shocked Emily. It was Officer Reynolds, the friendly cop who used to wave at her and offer suckers to Jace. "They sent me to watch you," Reynolds gasped, blood pooling from his nose. "You don't know what you're involved in. You think this is about money? This is about control. About erasing people who don't exist on paper." Marcus didn't wait for more answers. He pulled Emily and Jace down the fire escape as sirens echoed in the distance. Not police, but private security. Carla was already waiting at the alley with an unmarked van. As they sped off, Marcus finally looked Emily in the eyes and told her the truth, not just about who she was, but who he might be to her. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear, but from finally seeing the pieces fall into place. The questions that had haunted her entire life now had names, faces, and scars. She wasn't just a broke girl whose card got declined. She was the survivor of something monstrous, a witness to a crime buried so deep it nearly vanished. In the final days that followed, Carla worked tirelessly with independent journalists to release the encrypted data. A viral video titled, She didn't know she was the last witness until her son unlocked the truth, began trending across YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit, reigniting cold cases and shaking political foundations. Emily and Jace were granted new identities and safe harbor. The agency collapsed under public scrutiny, and several high-ranking officials were arrested. But the biggest twist came during the closing credits of a follow-up documentary, a security camera image, time-stamped just 2 days after the arrests, showing a woman presumed dead, Emily's mother, boarding a flight under a diplomatic passport. To this day, no one knows where she went. And maybe that's the final twist. The story didn't really end. It just went deeper underground. Emily's life would never return to normal, but she no longer walked in fear. She walked in truth, hand in hand with the son who saved her without ever knowing it. As for Marcus, he never asked for forgiveness. But in the quiet moments, when Jace would run to him and call him uncle, he knew he had earned something better: redemption. Now that you know the truth, ask yourself, what would you have done if your card was declined and the man behind you changed your life forever?